Hello, and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is titled Lost in Translation from What's Said to What's Heard. This is where we're unpacking a root cause of miscommunications.
Speaking of communication, I might sound a little bit different, but I'm okay. I'm on the up and up. I'm getting well. But I really wanted to cover this topic because it shows up so often in our private sessions with couples, in our own conversations, in witnessing family members communicate. And I think that the points we're going to make today will give you some new ahas to either think about individually or definitely talk about together. Now, before we get into these points, a friend of ours brought up an interesting point. She's like, you have to tell people about this. So quick story is we do Taco Tuesday with our friends. And I asked this question. I said, hey, do you guys have an end of year practice where you do a check-in and you debrief from the year, as well as set intentions and get focused for next year, like a connecting exercise? And they're like, no, that sounds like a great idea. Do you guys have a template for that? And I was like, yeah, that's one of our main resources. And we were laughing about this. She's like, you have to tell people more. They may not know that you have this. So that's what our family meeting guide is. It not only has our weekly templates, which are just quick check-ins to make sure you're on the same page, proactively communicate on a weekly basis. Then there's quarterly, a conversation to have 4 times a year that's different, and then once a year. And coming up on the end of the year, we cannot recommend enough going through the prompts that we have in our yearly template. So she told me to tell you guys, the family meeting guide is a must get. And there's 2 ways to get it. You can get it as a solo product, or you can get it as a bonus gift in our 30-day Prioritizing Us Couples Challenge, which you can go ahead and read why 36,000 couples have loved that. So you can sign up for the next round. So anyway, we'll link both of those in the show notes. I didn't want to disappoint her by not telling you guys about that because we do really recommend doing that yearly check-in this time of year.
Yeah, it's really funny. It's a great reminder, but it's a resource that is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably talk more about the steps to rebuild as well as the making up and moving forward guide.
Mm-hmm.
So we just know that's kind of more of the pain people are in. But here we are towards the end of the year. And this is obviously something that most people, for many different areas, health and professional reasons, really look at how their year went and then set the goals. It really does come down to the adaptive learning process. Now I'm starting to already jump in. But if you don't review how your performance has been in an area that's important to you, you can't make the adjustments needed to have things go differently.
Yeah.
And so we really invite you for this season to jump on that family meeting guide so that you can make those slight course corrections and be in a wildly different place just over 1 year.
And feel connected and inspired and motivated together too.
And one of the things that'll get in your way is being lost in translation.
True.
So here's the context for this episode. You're in the middle of a conversation with your partner, and you start to get this sense of that you're being clear on what you're saying, but your partner just doesn't seem to be getting it the way that you're meaning it. And it's subtle, right? So then you start to get a little frustrated, and maybe your tone or volume changes, or maybe a facial expression. Then they get annoyed or irritated, and then the conversation begins to escalate. We're not saying it's out of control, but
Sometimes it does, though.
well, it will. So when these dynamics happen, and they will, we want you to take that away. These are going to happen, but you can recover from it really quickly. And by quickly, I mean within a few seconds, you want to be able to catch it. That's really what this episode is about. Some couples, or maybe you would say many couples, I'm not sure, get into the cycle where the annoyances or the irritations start to raise the level of the conversation. And then, yes, to your point, it does escalate. In the escalation, past unmet needs are then brought forward, and you end up in a place where you don't even know what started this, but you're now in this argument hangover, you're disconnected from each other, and you're like, what the heck
It
happened?
just started from, I just made this simple comment, and how did it turn into this?
So the goal here is that these instances can happen of being lost in translation, but you can recover from these misinterpretations quickly, and you can also limit the amount that then come up in the future by understanding the meaning of what you are each articulating.
If I could say, I know that I just said sometimes it can start with like a quick comment we made, but this dynamic can also show up when you are trying to have a more meaningful conversation, whether that be one of you sharing your feelings or bringing
Mm.
up a need,
Oh, yeah,
or
yeah.
you're trying to address something and you're like, why did me expressing how I feel or something like that you turn into something? And so this happens in our sessions where we will be hearing, and because
Mm.
we're unbiased, right? And we're listening to the person, it's like, okay, they shared their feelings. Of course, sometimes people can modify how they express themselves. That's a totally different episode. But even if they do express it in a seemingly productive or even just neutral/benign way, then the other person can get either defensive, reactive, take it personally, and we will point that out to them. Hey, like things just got lost in translation.
Mhm.
And so we're going to really unpack some deeper reasons that this occurs.
It's interesting to think about this too, because as coaches, this third party, or
Mhm.
we might be third and fourth party, I'm not sure, two on two,
Together.
it's just a lot easier for us to really listen for the meaning and not necessarily to the words. We're in a position where we understand some of the context of backstory and history, and we understand, what the person's perspective is.
Mm.
So it's not just because we're coaches, but it is easier for us to understand what are they trying to convey. And I think in our sessions, we tend to listen less to the actual words.
Yeah.
Now, even in our own marriage, because of the dynamics of being in a romantic partnership, a marriage, being together over a long period of time, even we don't do this as well for each other as we probably do for other couples.
Mhm.
And it comes down to that after you're together for a long time, you end up creating these filters for each other, right? They're colorations in your perception of one another. So we'll use filters as we go through. But in cognitive psychology, it's called creating schemas and scripts. And you don't need to know the science behind it, but these scripts are the most fundamental aspect of the human mind. And you really can't escape it being that way. It's like you make observations, your mind categorizes those into, like, for example, oh, the first time I come across a tree, I create a schema for a tree.
Mhm.
And then I realize, oh, there's other trees, apples and oranges. So you start to build out these schemas. And then, depending on how those objects interact, you create these scripts. And so you start to predict how objects that you've categorized or labeled would interact depending on what you do. And the thing is, then we do that to our partner.
Yes.
So you'll get into a place where it's about questioning these schemas or scripts, or as we go forward, these filters. You want to start to approach your interactions with your partner from, like, questioning or thinking about what are the filters I've created,
Mhm.
not that as you're interacting, your beliefs are hard and fact. And we'll
Yeah.
go more into that, but that's really the premise here.
And just to add more to filters, you may have heard the term rosy colored glasses.
Mm.
That's a term that people can ascribe to when you're early in a relationship. Maybe you're in the preparing for marriage stage, you're early. Like you have these rosy colored glasses. You see everything through a positive lens. Oh my gosh, I love this about them and that about them, and they're this and they're that. That's natural in the beginning. But then these rosy colored glasses start to become muddied, you could say. And in a sense, they can even become negative, depending on whether you've been good at like following some of our tools around repair or having deeper conversations, clearing up the clutter. We're going to talk a little bit more about all that too. If you don't do those things, they can color the way that you see each other in a negative sense. Now you're not even focused as much on the positive traits, you're focused on the negative traits. And then the way the world works, right, is they may give you more observations, right? Because they're demonstrating certain characteristics and it just strengthens that filter that you have, even though it might be just a fraction really of who they are. So those filters, like Aaron said, the goal is that you really just start to more so be cognizant of that. How am I filtering what they say? Do I filter seemingly like potentially benign or neutral or even positive things through a negative lens that I have of them?
Mm.
And where might that have come from? Is there something for us to repair, clean up? We talk about emotional clutter. So I'm kind of giving away some of the future stuff, but I just wanted to describe that about the filters.
It's hard to really identify these within yourself. It takes a high level of awareness and honesty and admitting some things. And so we do hope you take the time as you're driving or running, walking, whatever you're doing to maybe even pause or come back to this and just really consider what types of filters might be getting formed. And though it'll be in the form of a phrase likely, and it'll be more simple, but it'll take you some time to land on it. A filter would be something like, my partner's controlling, they disrespect me, they dominate me, they micromanage my life, they're rude, they're inconsiderate. It's just something more simple like that. But it's
Mhm.
that basis that creates that colored lens from all of the simple interactions that you'll get from them.
Let's be real for a second. What was the filter you shared with me this morning that you were starting to form about me?
No, I forgot.
I can tell you what it was. So
Yeah,
we had a little clearing up
a little
conversation this
debrief.
morning. Yep. We do this, right? We practice. We have our family meeting check-ins. And the one that you shared with me was like the filter sounded something like you always have something to say, like
Oh, I
feedback.
remember what it was.
Yeah.
I was trying to be clear. And
Mhm.
the reason that I said I didn't remember is because it was a particular word.
Okay.
We could say critical. I've used the word comment. So we're getting personal here. For some reason, you don't like when I've said to you that you make comments. I think that's the most neutral term.
Yeah.
So going into this debrief, I did select the word correction. I
Mhm.
want to be
Yeah.
clear. I use that very intentionally.
Yeah. And
That I said, I feel I'm getting more corrections lately.
And admittedly, he was right, right? And I was like, I get it. I can see from your perception. And I have to, one of my areas of work is that I can be sometimes overly assertive or expressive, right? That I can be sometimes too vocal. And that's my work, right? Is to be able to be
This
more
is this
discerning.
is a good distinction.
Hmm.
I'm not correcting you now,
Okay.
but because I'm always really intent that we use these two words
Hmm.
specific, so that you as the listener understand there is definitely a difference between assertiveness and verbal expression. So to your point, yes, you are assertive, but what we're talking about is more in a, oh, would you say unfiltered verbal
Like I
expression?
could be too vocal
Too
sometimes.
vocal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that you're overly assertive because being assertive is about yourself.
Yeah.
But your comments
Sure.
about me are the verbal, how do you
Sure, correct me about correcting. No.
say? Right,
No,
right.
it's a good point. I mean, especially when I can either be stressed or feel like I've got a lot on my plate, I can sometimes lose that like restraint of what I should say and what I
I just
shouldn't.
want to be clear for the listeners that that's not assertiveness.
Okay.
Assertiveness is about you. It's
Mhm.
not really about your partner unless you're making a request,
Yeah,
which
good.
is really still about you because of your needs, which really brings us to, I want to lay out what creates these filters. You use the first one. Things that are unrepaired from the past definitely create these filters.
Mhm.
Filters are also made by the unexpressed and unmet expectations, however small, that will go unexpressed and obviously then further unmet over time. There's also a lack of change to a requested behavioral adjustment
Mhm.
to those needs. And if those changes aren't made, that creates a filter like, I can't count on my partner. They're never going to change. They're
You don't
rigid.
seem to care that much.
Totally.
Mhm.
Exactly. Perfect example. Also, I would say just the interpretations that you make from what each other says, the translations, hence the name of this podcast, but the interpretations that you make on just little actions or little comments your partner makes, if they never get addressed, they get confirmed through confirmation bias,
Yep.
which then further cements them as these schema and scripts that you just then automatically run as per what you observe from your partner going forward.
Yeah.
So that may have sounded like a lot. We wanted to give you just a couple of places in which we believe these filters start to get created.
I just want to say this because that was a lot there before we transition to some points of what to do. Like, what can we do to shift this pattern? I think you can really fall into two potential spaces right now. As you hear this episode, you may realize that, you know what, our miscommunications, or even conversations turning into conflicts, it's probably just because we're so quickly reacting to each other. We have certain filters for each other. And yeah, we can talk through it. We can work through it. And you know what? I think we could get better if we proactively communicated. That's really where the family meeting guide can help. It's like, okay, we need to just get better at getting ahead of things instead of just so quickly reacting and being stressed and misinterpreting each other and being on different pages. So that's one place. The other place, because Aaron was kind of quickly going through those, is that there may be deeper issues in the relationship that need some repair, that need some mending, and need to have deeper conversations, frankly, where it's not just a simple, you know, hey, let's talk about this week, right? It's like you may need to do what we call repairing and rebuilding. And so, if you feel there are some deeper wounds that need to be addressed in order to clean up those filters that you have for each other, that's where our steps to rebuild a marriage guide will help. That's a different practice than the family meeting guide. This is more about, okay, we need to do some cleanup. So that link will also put in the show notes because I just didn't want to leave that out, knowing that some people are going to hear this and be like, yep, we got some deep stuff to work through. How do we even navigate those conversations? That's our steps to rebuild a marriage guide for those deeper conversations.
So let's jump into 3 other things you can do from listening to this podcast to start to get back on the same page with hearing what your partner is actually meaning and then not having these filters end up getting created. So, first one being clean up the clutter in your relationship. And what this really means is to assume, now really get this, if you're going to have this conversation, you have to enter it with your assumption that you misperceived a few things. Like you haven't captured everything from your partner in the way that it was intended or the way that it was meant. So if you go into this conversation with that mindset, then there's more of an openness. If I start a conversation with you about lost in translation, about filters, and I'm like, I'm sure that I have captured all of it and I've got it all right. I mean, what opening is there? There's not going to be any place for me to
explore,
update some of my past beliefs or, if you will, schemas. I said I was going to stop using that word. So you got to clean up this clutter. So you assume that you've likely misperceived or misinterpreted a few things and have not captured the true meaning that your partner has meant. And you really want to straighten these out from that positive intent. Positive intent being, let's just get back on the same page. We both have missed a few things. Let's bring all the past up to present. Let's just feel like there's understanding here and we can have this sort of clean slate, going forward. A part of this conversation will also require that you get your integrity back in order. And so we've done podcast episodes, maybe only one.
I'd say a few
primarily
we've mentioned
one.
it.
Yeah, we've mentioned integrity. And so integrity, I guess, quick reminder, there's your word. When your word is intact, it's whole, it's complete with your partner, that's having integrity. But your word can be things that you say, things that you know to do, and then it's also what you say you stand for. So again, that's a lot. That's a whole episode.
Yeah.
But as you're having this conversation with your partner, you're intending to clean up some of these misinterpretations, this clutter, then now you have to be willing to then hear these areas from your partner that because of the misinterpretations, then you didn't follow through on what your partner was actually asking of you. Or you gave a compliance to something that you weren't understanding what they were actually asking for.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then you went and did it. And then there's this frustration because what you did was not what your partner was actually asking you to do, for some example, right?
But I tried. I did my best.
But I did this and that. It's like, well, so what? That's not what I meant at all. So again, we're trying to bring some humor here. This conversation for integrity is very important if you want to clean up the clutter. You have to understand the misinterpretations and then be willing to hear how you can make adjustments and bring your integrity back in order. That's how you clean up that side of the street.
Yes. The next thing here is to really know each other's triggers. And of course, that means know your own. Like, you should be able to very clearly say, yep, I know what my triggers are in our relationship. And I know where they come from, whether
Mm,
that be from my distant past or our recent past, because they can form in both places, right? Like your upbringing or your formative experiences, as well as things that show up in your relationship now. So you need to know your own triggers so that you have that self-awareness, because that might be even driving at times the perception
mm,
of what your partner is saying.
that's
Again,
true.
it might be seemingly benign or neutral what they're saying, but it is triggering something
Mm,
within you. So you
mm.
need to know what that is and where that comes from.
I just want to say one quick thing, and I've
Sure.
been talking a lot. That's so true. If I'm triggered, that means the event that's happening is bringing up a familiar emotion.
Mhm.
And that emotion then brings to your mind similar events from the past that had you feel that way.
Yeah.
So what that means is as soon as you feel the similar feelings of say being controlled, all of a sudden you bring forward like all of these ideas of when you've been controlled,
Mm.
then everything that's being said out here is immediately being filtered through
Yeah.
where are they trying to control me again?
Yeah. So, yes, great point. So, knowing your own, but also know your partner's triggers.
Mm,
I hope that you guys have had a deep conversation about what your triggers are. And if you haven't, do that. And if you need support, use our guides, right? Because that'll take you deeper into that. Knowing your partner's triggers helps you recognize in the moment when if you perceive a reaction that seems bigger
mm,
than in your mind is like, but that's not correlated to what I said, or it's
yeah.
out of proportion, then it's a cue. Oh, something's triggering them. Let me be curious instead of getting caught up in the conflict cycle, which we've also talked about. It's like, okay, they're clearly triggered because I recognize it. I see the
Mm,
signs in their body language, how they're talking. So maybe I need to stop defending what I'm saying,
man.
because I could keep like, I could even double down on what I'm saying. No, this is what I said.
You're not getting it.
But instead of that, because you're not going to appeal to someone from that rational place when they are triggered. So you have to meet them
Mm,
where they're at
well,
and be able to de-escalate things and really say, okay, let me understand what's
mm,
coming up for you. What did you hear? That's a really good question to ask at times if you feel things are getting lost in translation and or they're triggered by it. Is like, hey, can you tell me what you heard? I just want to see like where are we misunderstanding each other? And then maybe it's different what they heard, how it landed for
mm.
them, again because of all the reasons we covered so far. So you got
Let
to
me give you
know.
one
Sure.
other
Yeah.
one then. You could say, what am I missing? Right. So that's if you see your partner's getting triggered and they were, let's
Mhm.
say, the speaker. Hey, it just seems like I'm missing something here.
Mhm.
That's another one. So just as you were talking, for some reason, a small trigger for me is what's coming up for you. I
You
don't
don't like that
personally.
question?
No, just there's nothing wrong with that question. Just over the years and being in different environments, I've heard people use that a lot.
Mm.
So I'm just giving a different alternate example.
I don't think most people would be triggered
No,
by that
I'm just
question
saying,
though.
just trying to
Mhm.
be humorous here. Hey, it seems like I'm missing something.
Yeah.
I think that's like such a soft landing that recognizes number one, my partners might be triggered,
Yeah.
and there's probably something that's being
You
misinterpreted.
know what's so funny? Something just got lost in translation right
Just
now
now,
in this,
by
because
me.
what
Oh boy.
you heard, because you said it's a trigger for you, is the what's coming up for you. What I said is, "Hey, what did you hear me say?"
I think you said both.
Okay. All right.
If
Well,
we played this
maybe.
back, I don't know. We'll
but
see.
but that's funny, right? Notice that. So, yeah, that's a different question. I said,
Someone will
"Hey,
have to message, so we're gonna use this as a game. We're not gonna go back and edit this out.
uh-huh.
So you could tell us this is a fun game,
Yes.
quote unquote. Who is right?
Right.
Did Jocelyn say what's coming up for you?
I'm
I think so. I think so.
99.9% sure it was,
One of us
"What did you
filtered
hear me
something.
say?" But that's hilarious because,
Yeah,
see, it happens so quickly. That's why Aaron's point about assume that you're
man, that's true.
misunderstanding things at times,
I
right?
hope I heard that. Otherwise, wow, I really.
That's where double checking, that's where, people talk about like principles of either active listening or mirroring. Like, hey, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, especially when you're having meaningful conversations. So, know each other's triggers next.
So the last one I want to cover here today is just own your tones and body language.
Mm.
And I know a lot of people say, like, check your tone. And, tone is kind of a common thing to talk about as a couple. But once you walk through these, so you've cleaned up the clutter, you're bringing your integrity back, you're understanding your triggers and recognizing the triggers of your partner, then it's like, okay, I can look at those situations that have got us off track and then start to own where your tone and body language can charge the conversation, right? Rather than just being like neutral or benign, as you said earlier, your tone and your body language can certainly further create misinterpretations,
Mm-hmm.
right? We know from various places that there's a lot of nonverbal communication. Some places say up to 80%. We don't really doesn't really
Yeah.
matter about the percent right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about certain situations where you're starting to filter a perception, your body will usually respond to certain emotional experiences in a similar way. So I've just been using the control, for example. So if I start to feel as if I'm being controlled or misperceived, then my muscles are going to tense up and probably in the same place, like maybe up in my shoulders or maybe I cross my arms. And that physiological response signals then to my brain to just automatically run this
Mm.
same script. Every
Yeah.
time I feel controlled, body does the same thing, and then my response verbally is typically the same.
Mm.
So I may then signal that aggressive or defensive verbal response. And this is the thing you want to just take ownership of for yourself. So understand what these patterns are, your own triggers, and where can I take some more responsibility for that automatic default either tone or body language or stance that pretty much has me run that same script from this perception.
I think there's so many good points. And I think just as a whole, what you just said about tone and body language being so much of our communication, I think it is just very important to be mindful. Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. Again, we're going to be
Yeah.
stressed at times, rushed,
Hmm.
you know, say something in a way we didn't actually mean it. So that's where, again, just like checking that you're hearing each other correctly or where the other person's coming from. But that's where we have to be mindful. What our words might be harmless, but the way we say it, and I know I'm guilty of this at times, can sound either like a reprimand or sound like we are really frustrated or
Mm,
critical. And again, it might be even just coming from a place of feeling rushed or stressed.
mm,
But it's going to be different in the way it lands for the other person and not feel like we're on the same team and oh, this is my partner who loves me, who's just, saying something, they've got my back. It might feel like, oh my gosh, my partner is really frustrated with me or that really disappointed them. And so you're going to be like on different wavelengths. That's the energy will feel different. So just pay attention to not just the words that you say, but the energy, the tone, the body language, being connecting, unifying, as loving as possible,
curious,
curious, absolutely, because
seeking to understand.
that's going to bridge the gap between you two, because that's what's really important, is that you feel on the same team with each other. So we covered a lot here. Please send us a note if this episode really resonated with you, what you took away. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe so you can hear past and future episodes. We've covered so many topics in depth. And also, if you take away value from our podcast, it would help so much if you would rate us on whichever platform you're listening on and share it with a friend. That helps us so much. Also, we referenced a few resources. Make sure you go to the links in the show notes, because it will help you implement so many of these conversations and these tools and not have it be just an idea like, oh, that was a good idea, the Freeman said. So get our family meeting guide. We mentioned 2 ways that you can get that, either individually or with a challenge. We mentioned our steps to rebuild a marriage guide, our repair guide. So there's a lot. They'll all be linked in the show notes, but we've got your backs and we cannot wait to talk to you on the next episode.